Test, test, test. Hey there, Brad.
Hey, Andy, how are you?
Oh, good, man. Good. Glad you're able to join. Or do we get David with us today too, or no?
Well, we should. Let me just make sure he's trying to get on right now. Let's see here.
Okay, great.
He may have. Oh, shoot. No, he should have been on already.
Yeah, well, we can go with you, and when he joins us, he joins us.
Well, shoot.
That's the beauty of live stream. I guess we go.
Yeah, so does this kick in 18 seconds?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
So I'm just going to see if he answers. And
there he goes. Yeah, he just joined in. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah, perfect timing, man. Well, hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi,
yeah.
Andy. Hey, it's great to have you join. We don't typically live stream our episodes, but I thought the interest of what we saw today in the discussion on LinkedIn was worth opening this to a greater group of people. So I thought we'd give them a little peek of what happens in the actual interview. So thank you guys for joining. It was really enjoyed reading your book. I didn't know anything about your Athena book, and so I think that there was probably some add-on from that to this one and additional learning and things like that. So yeah,
absolutely. It's been a journey, starting with Athena Rising and now on to Good Guys. Yeah. But yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah. So before we get started, let me give you a little bit of background on the podcast. Typically, people who are leading projects, so very team-based, and months ago they were co-located, but now they're all over the place. But one of the things I love about teaching project management classes is we often have at least 60, often 70% or more of the participants in the workshops are women, and so it's a path that people are seeing as an opportunity, but there's still a lot of us guys who are trying to figure out what are the best ways to be allies, and that's really what your book is all about, right? So so I really look forward to having this discussion. Just to give you an idea of how I prepared some questions, and just to make it a little bit easier, I thought it'd be good to I'll direct them. So I'll say, so David, okay. And I'll say, hey, Brad, but also if I direct a question to David, and Brad, you've got something you want to add to it, I mean, don't hesitate also to jump in. So we'll keep it a conversation, but I'll at least get the first part of that. Such that.
We're pretty good at that. So we're happy to, hand off the mic and have fun with it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Great. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Any questions before we get started?
And how long you planning on going?
I was thinking 3 hours. No, just kidding. Most
we can do that.
Yeah, right. I'm sure. Right. Yeah, no doubt. I don't have a predetermined time that we have to hit, so we don't have a window that we have to hit. So I would say, feel free to elaborate on any of the questions as much as you'd like or as little as you like. So it's that is totally up to you. I want to make sure I'm good on the sound levels on a backup recording. So. David, do you have a favorite proverb or saying or quote or anything that I could test you out with here?
Any beer is good beer. No, I really an IPA is one of my favorites, and Brad and I are craft beer drinkers. And so, a good IPA, a hazy New England IPA is really right there for us.
Okay. So that's not like a bro comment necessarily, right?
No, that's kind of what brought us together, you know.
Okay.
Our love for good craft beer.
Okay. So good. So it's good to get a little bit more of the backstory here. Okay. All right. So Brad, how about you?
I would say, in alignment with what Dave and I talk about, that you are an ally for a woman when she calls you an ally.
I love that in the book. Don't call yourself out as the ally, because that could easily turn into some of the signaling. And you had some interesting names for it, but it was like was it the fake feminist or the fake sexist or something like that? Yeah. So there are a lot of really clever ideas that it's very eye opening. So I look forward to this discussion. So all right, great. Let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
We're talking today about a new book entitled Good Guys. So David and Brad, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Glad to be here, Andy.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Andy.
Oh, man. Before we get into the content of the book, I'm interested in learning more about each of you. So, Brad, you mentioned in the book that you had some family influences growing up that helped kind of form you when it comes to being an ally for women. Would you tell us about that?
Sure, Andy. Yeah, I thought there were two that came to mind immediately. So my father, I got to give my dad cred because he was a guy who I watched, he role modeled not putting up with the misogynist behavior and banter. And my dad was a big guy. And so I saw him shut that down pretty handily many, many times. And so I learned from that, not being afraid to lean in and disrupt. And then the other big one was my sister. So my sister, she's a little sister, 3 years behind me, but she's a Navy captain, an absolute rock star in the Navy. And I was in the Navy too, but I have seen my sister encounter all of these headwinds, and I never did when I was active duty. Everything from being told to smile more to don't run so fast on the physical fitness test because it makes the guys feel bad. So, just watching her and watching the way she deals with all of that gracefully, I think has really piqued my empathy a bit for what women experience that I don't every day.
And Brad, was it you that said that you and your sister kind of wired up kind of similarly? Was that you? Yeah. So I can't remember exactly how you said it, but maybe don't come off as the warmest or something. Was there something like that?
Well, yeah. So, we're both pretty direct and, when we give feedback and that sort of thing. And, people have always said, hey, I'm really calm and kind. And my sister's been told she's emasculating when she gives direct feedback. And so it's just such a fascinating gender difference in how women get evaluated in the workplace.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. David, how would you summarize your journey to becoming someone who now focuses on gender and work and family issues? Because I don't know if somebody at age 8 says, hey, that's what I want to do, but you evolved to that point, right? And so how would you describe that journey? How it formed you?
Yeah, I think I agree. It's definitely been a journey, but I think some of the key experiences that shaped where I am today in this journey is it really kind of started in my college years. I'm a graduate of the Naval Academy, place where Brad and I taught together as well. But in my years there in the early 80s, which was the first years when we were, again, integrating from a gender perspective, integrating women into the Navy and the Naval Academy at the time, it's the women were a very small percentage. And just, seeing how women were treated in many cases as really kind of second-class citizens was really eye-opening. For the first time in my life, I had never experienced that before. I'd never seen that before. I certainly hadn't seen it in my family and hadn't seen it in my school experiences. So it was really eye-opening. And then after that, my wife, who's also a career naval officer, retired now as well, our career paths were different, but our career experiences were really different. In terms of, again, much in the same way that Brad was talking about his sister, watching her go through her career and the challenges and the barriers that were put up in front of her that I never saw. I just never experienced those. And I would have never understood that. And I think that's part of the journey that's so important for men in particular, is that if you haven't seen it, you haven't experienced it, it's hard to fix something that you haven't seen or you don't see the problem. And I was fortunate because, my wife shared those things with me. And then I could go back and think about that in my own squadrons as a Navy pilot and see when we integrated women into those squadrons, what did that look like? And were women experiencing the same thing? And so I began to accrue this this mass of knowledge now, that of understanding what this looks like. And then really it got to my grad school years and my PhD work in particular, where I began to be able to formulate that into something. I was like, all right, so now what do I do with this?
Yeah.
And again, I was very fortunate in having a mentor, my dissertation advisor, Dr. Mady Siegel. So a woman, a senior woman, as my advisor and mentor. And she was really very helpful, in many ways challenging me, because I think I always considered myself, we didn't use the term ally probably back then, but I would have considered myself to be somebody, who, again, all for gender equity. I would, not that I would self-label as a feminist, but I would say, hey, I lean in that direction and believing what that's all about. And, and she challenged me on that in many ways, because of my own language and behavior sometimes, that I was still part of the problem. And I was like, oh, how can I be part of the problem? I'm here. I'm part of the solution. And it was really important to get that feedback. And again, we talk about that in the book, about so critical for men to have trusted colleagues, women in their inner circle, that can give them those kinds of feedback, so they can really begin to see their blind spots, to see the things that they're not seeing, and then change right into aligning your behavior and your language in a way that that is what you expect.
I love how you said that. I think, and I'll get into this, but I think we generally think this is a problem other people have. It's I can look at my formative years. I grew up with 3 sisters. I was the only son, and so I feel like I grew up around women. I feel like I learned a lot, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I was somehow an expert in the workplace. And there's so many things I like about the book, but vocabulary matters. And when you have vocabulary and you have this term, and then all of a sudden you see it everywhere. And so we'll talk about some of those. But before we talk about what the book is about, I'd love for you to mention what the book is not about. Okay. So Brad, what are some messages that you're not giving in your book?
Yeah.
Good guy.
Yeah. It's funny. Maybe we need a whole session on what not to do, or, how not to think about this. But there are a couple of things that come to top of mind immediately. This is not a book on rescuing, right? And I think too often men, when they hear the word allyship, they think, I gotta get on my steed and get on my armor and go rushing in. And women need me to help or rescue them from bad things in the workplace. Not at all. And the women we interviewed said, please don't do that. That's not helpful. In fact, it undermines me in many ways. And this goes to the whole issue of listening, right? I don't need to fix you. And I think 2 men think, I'm going to go fix her and fix her problem, fix her work. No, I really just want to be a better colleague and an ally. So, and then the other thing I would say is, we were talking about this as we were bantering before the conversation here, but don't self-label as an ally. Read Good Guys, do the work, execute the ally behaviors. And if a woman decides you're an ally and calls you that, maybe you can feel good about that, but don't assume you're an ally to other women. This is always going to be in the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add there is that, as you saw in our book, the book is very much about what to do, and very aspirational, as we like to think about it. Because again, we don't find that blaming and shaming is successful in changing behavior. It doesn't make people feel good about themselves. It doesn't make them feel good about what they're trying to do. So we're not here to blame and shame men. But in the same way, we're here to hold each other accountable for our behavior, and we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. In the live stream chat, there was a comment that somebody said, I'm good with what not to do. Solutions are few, but definitely what not to do. Isn't that the truth? Sometimes I feel like in situations, I don't know what to do, but don't make it worse.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have that ability. And what I was thinking was, when I came up with the question, was I feel like sometimes whether it's a book or messaging on this is really more about that shaming part of like, you're just a bad guy, and I think you do put together a hopeful book about, hey, listen, it's, I think you start from you're probably not even aware of this, sort of perspective. And I think that's a healthy and inviting way to go about the book. Any thoughts about that?
Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead, buddy.
I was going to say what we find is, though, in the conversations with men, and a lot of the research out there shows the same thing, is that, most men believe in gender equity. They believe in gender equality. The vast majority. I mean, this is really what got us started several years ago, is we would have these conversations with men in their houses or in private spaces, right? And we talk about this, and they're just like the biggest allies in the world, right? As you start to talk about this when you're in private, right? And when you talk about it in terms of their own, their family or their friends or the people that they're closest to at work. But then the minute you get out in public and suddenly it's poof, it's gone. It's like, where'd it go? Where is that allyship? And it's just missing. And this is, part of the problem is that, one, it could be that, and we do find this, that men don't see the problem, and that's part of it. The other part is that because I believe in gender equity, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm actually doing anything to change or to create gender equity, right? There's this aspiration gap, and we find this, and we've had this conversation in our country most recently, over the last 4 or 5 months about race as well, right? Just because you don't believe in racism doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything to dismantle the systems, right, that are creating this bias and this discrimination that's out there. So it's the same exact thing around allyship when we're talking about it from a gender perspective. It works the same way from a race.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I appreciate it. And let's build on that, because David, I'm going to guess that nearly every guy listening to this episode will agree that it's an important topic to cover. But I'm also guessing most guys see this as a problem that other men have for the most part. So as you say in the book, you can't fix a problem that you don't see. So David, what are some subtle ways that you, David G. Smith, author of books on this topic, struggle yourself with this at times? Like, can you think of any subtle signs or mistakes that creep into your own experience despite your training and expertise?
Yeah, and I don't think they have to be subtle either. And I think that, again, along the same lines that we started where this on, that we're on a journey, right? And so we're all learning along the way. And I think, again, Brad and I will tell you that we're still learning too. I think that's part of what guys have to bring to the game, is we have to walk in the door with a certain amount of humility that,
absolutely,
I don't necessarily have all the answers here, and I'm not going to get it right all the time. And again, I have good intentions, and I want you to have good intentions, but it can't just be good intentions. We have to think about the effect and the actions and what we do. And let me give you just some examples, and these are ones that Brad and I still chuckle at each other about. But so, for example, when we were writing our first book, you mentioned Athena Rising. Well, as authors, often the working title was something that was different than that. Much like with Good Guys, there was a different working title for the book. And often as authors, I think we have this great title for the book and it's the best ever and it's never going to change. And so far, Brad and I are 0 for 2 together on that one. and oh, by the way, we've always come up, our editors have always come up with better names than we had. But for our first book, the working title was Guiding Athena, and instead of Athena Rising. And our editor, a woman, came to us very late in the game, as we're getting close to publication time. And she said, have you guys thought about your title? And we're like, yeah, we love it. Guiding Athena. Guiding is kind of a synonym for mentoring. And we think this is really powerful. We love it. We're sold on this. And she said, well, have you thought about how women might perceive that title, and what guiding, do women need to be guided in this way? And we were like, I don't know that we thought about it like that. And we're like, yeah, okay, I could see how that might come off wrong. And we're like, wow, but here again, we had somebody who was willing to come to us and have, maybe it was a hard conversation. I don't know how she felt, if it was hard or not, but it was really eye-opening for us, something that we just hadn't seen. Another one, we were doing the interviews for both books, but around Athena Rising, we were interviewing all these very senior, really high-flying women. We heard story after story, and I'm trying to remember if we had any of this in the LinkedIn conversation we were just having, online. But women were telling us that, yeah, we'd be in this meeting, and I had this great idea, and I put it out on the table, and everybody'd be just kind of like, okay, whatever. And then they go down the line, and 3 dudes later, some guy had repackaged it, made it his own, and now it is the greatest idea since sliced bread. And I was like, I can't believe I'm hearing this story after story after story. And I asked Brad, I said, have you ever had that happen to you? He's like, nope, never had it happen. I'm like, me either. But now that I'm aware of it, I've seen it, now I can see it in action. And now I know what it is, I can do something about it. And this speaks to the things that we're just not aware of as guys. Yeah. And it could be everything from that to interrupting, to making sure women get their fair share of airtime when it comes to conversations in there. We're not distributing the housework, the office housework, and the meetings in the same way. And, I was probably guilty of all of that, every single one of those at some point. And I still have to think and be very conscious about that when you get into a group setting like that.
Even one thing from the book, and it seems obvious, I think, even as I say it, but sometimes I might just say to a group, hey guys, what do you think about this? So now those words would come off my lips without even thinking about it. I don't mean it to be a bro comment. I don't mean anything. And I think for a lot of women, they might not even think twice about it, but there are some people that are like, that's just reinforcing in just a little way, guys. Right? So Brad, what are some little subtle things like that?
Oh, yeah. So, some that come to top of mind, you mentioned guys versus, and then how about referring to women as girls, right?
Right.
Walking in a room and say, hey, what are you girls talking about? Immediately kind of infantilizing and diminishes them in some way. Again, maybe really common language, especially in men of a certain generation. But if I hear that, I got to be willing to say, hey, could you refer to them as women, buddy? I'd really appreciate that. And, it doesn't have to be super disruptive, but I feel like I got to mention that to him. You mentioned the interrupting, so it's ubiquitous. I got to start noticing that. And I got to be willing to put a little skin in the game, when that happens. Dave mentioned the office housework. This one's really subtle too. Often we just ubiquitously look at the one woman in the meeting and say, yeah, could you take the notes? Or, hey, could you plan that social committee? All of these non-promotable things that, I think immediately disadvantage her. And we don't think about it. And I got to think about it. And I got to say, whoa, how about if we have a, distribution sort of system where everyone gets a chance to do that, or I'll take that because, Myra has already done that before. So let's not ask her to do that again. I just got to become more situationally aware with that thing. And then last thing, watch the benign sexism, right? So these are those more tricky comments where a guy may say, hey, Laura would be terrific for this, but, she has kids at home, right? And so it sounds chivalrous on the surface. And what I've really done is just sort of undermine her opportunity, or, promoted the motherhood penalty. Because she's a mom, she can't be effective, at this or that. If I hear that, and I got to be listening for it, I've got to say, whoa. How does her parenting status have anything to do with whether she can tackle this? I got to be willing to call that out.
Yeah. Brad, let's build on that a little bit, because you mentioned something I'd never heard before in the book. It was the women are wonderful effect, and how that ties to the notion of benevolent sexism. So once again, I feel like vocabulary matters. And so when we understand it, then we can see it. So tell us about the women are wonderful effect and how that ties into benevolent sexism.
Absolutely, Adam. Sorry, Andy. So this is really interesting, because this gets to when you ask men, are you sexist? Of course, I say no, I'm not at all. And I'm really thoughtful when it comes to women. And then you maybe give them a sentence completion task. And this is where this research comes from. Women are blank, or, girls are, or I think this of, women I work with. What men say are on the surface very positive things, right? Women are just kind, they're gentle, they're caring, they're compassionate. Dave's done a lot of research on compassion bias in women. And, those things sound nice, right? So you can't knock the guy for saying that. But what's missing, if you really dig down, is she is a take charge leader, or she's competent, or she is, ready to lean into this next promotion. I'm not framing her in a gentic, really active way, so way we would frame men. And if that's missing, I am not going to be sponsoring her. I'm not going to be pushing her forward for the next promotion or opportunity. So we men, all of us, it's not just certain guys, all of us have to hold ourselves accountable, to sort of, check ourselves on immediate implicit bias. Another one that comes up immediately often is the motherhood thing again. So, men may have this thing where they see a woman, yeah, she's talented, but you know what? She's a woman. She's a ticking time bomb of maternity. Any minute she might start having children. I would never say that out loud because I may not be thinking it consciously, but that may be my framework for women. They're just not a good investment, for example, as a mentor, because they're not going to be around here very long. And that's all going on under the surface. So women are wonderful, they're nice, they're great moms. If I'm hearing that only, in my own internal dialogue, I got to check myself.
And the idea of the benevolent sexism is it's well intended and yet, right?
Yes.
Isn't that kind of the idea?
That's the idea.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of my favorite stories in the LinkedIn thread today was from my friend Sarah Reeser, who says she was many months pregnant and was contractor, and the boss said, "Hey, I want to hire you." He converted her full time when there was like no hiding the fact. And once she had the child, the boss was like, "Let's work on a flexible style, but I want you." And she felt so advocated for. So, and so it was really not just some sort of signaling I'm an ally, whatever. He lived being an ally and stands out to her to this day as one of her best bosses. Isn't that cool?
Yes. It's a terrific example.
And it shouldn't stand out, right? That's what we're talking about here. So, David, one of the ideas you have in the book is to increase our gender intelligence. And I thought one of the most compelling suggestions in that section was for guys to intentionally start conversations with women to get a better firsthand understanding of their challenges and ideas. So, David, what are some examples of questions you find are helpful to foster those sorts of discussions? Because I think some guys would be like, I like the idea, I don't know exactly what to ask. So what are some questions maybe to ask for, and maybe some things to watch out for or to avoid in these sorts of discussions?
Yeah, it's a great one. And again, this is where we ask men to start in particular, is to start developing that awareness, develop that gender intelligence, your GQ out there. Mm-hmm. And developing awareness, again, it needs to start actually before you go talk to a woman, is go self-educate. Mm-hmm. So read Good Guys. Right. Go watch webinars. There's more webinars you could possibly watch on these kind of topics today. Yeah. Read, educate yourself, formulate the questions, think about your own experiences, maybe bounce some of this off of women who are really close to you. If you have a partner or somebody that you live with or somebody who's really close to you right now, you can just bounce some of those ideas off of them first before you go exploring, I think, with your work colleagues. But then I think once you're ready, then you can begin to think about, all right, so what are the things that are most important that I'd like to learn about, that are I find most intriguing about myself and what I read about and self-educated on. And the other thing is, I think some of us would feel a little uneasy, maybe approaching somebody that's maybe even if they're just a friend at work, or maybe it's your boss or somebody who works for you, that maybe I still feel like it's not okay, or it's just a little weird to even ask her about this at this point. So we tell guys, hey, it's okay to ask. So would it be all right if I asked you about your experiences in the workplace? And again, I think that's helpful because she can choose to say yes, no, whatever she'd like at that point. And yeah, so it's okay. And if she doesn't want to engage, but I think context matters too. And we have to come back at this. And because if you're suddenly taking an interest in gender equity or gendered experiences in the workplace and start asking a lot of women about what's going on, they might look at you like, what's going on here? What's the deal? And so I think you have to give them some context that, hey, I've been reading this book and I've been trying to learn more about this because I think this is something that maybe I can learn a lot about, as well as I think we might be able to use in our own workplace. So if I was trying to be a better ally in the workplace, what are some things that I ought to understand about your experience here? Yeah. And if I was trying to do there was one thing that I could do more of or less of that would make your experience here in the workplace better, or women's experiences in the workplace better, what would that be? And again, that opens the door just for a very I think a very trusting, a very friendly conversation. There's no accusations going on here about anything. And she can choose to how far or how deep she wants to go into that conversation with you about it. It can be eye-opening, just like in the LinkedIn thread today that you started. Eye-opening, some of the things there, if you're a guy and you had never seen that before, that would be really eye-opening. And I'm sure that, again, some of the men who were reading that were like, I had no idea that was something that went on in the workplace. That's developing your gender intelligence, because it's developing this idea that, hey, I haven't walked a mile in your shoes. I might not understand what's going on here. And these are blind spots for us as leaders and even just as colleagues and as friends.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the page that has, I think, 4 questions, and I modeled the LinkedIn thing after those 4 questions, but I just felt like, just like you said, they're not accusatory. They are not leading. They're very open. And it's like a number of things in the book. Like, what are some common phrases when you don't know what to say? Some common phrases you can practice ahead of time. And these are questions you can ask ahead of time, but something that's, I don't know, I guess I'm embarrassed a little bit to say this, but this thing that came out in the thread today about, I feel like I have to over prepare. Now, that's not surprise to you because you've had all these conversations and you even mentioned it in the book, but I feel like, wow, that'd be so easy for us to miss, that women feel like they have to go above and beyond in order to make sure people know that I deserve to be here or that I'm capable. And so just one of many things that if we just asked the question, it would come out.
Yeah. And that's a really important one, Andy, for us men to be more thoughtful about, especially around things like pushing people forward for promotions or stretch assignments, because, the evidence is really clear that men get a pass on potential, right? Both in terms of hiring and promotion. We see a guy and we say, oh, he's got the chops to do this, even though he's never done it before. When it comes to a woman who's maybe got the identical experience and talent, we say, well, really like to see her prove it first, right? And of course, you never get the experience if no one gives you the opportunity or the promotion. So that is the bind for women, and I think we can be more attuned to that.
Yeah. Joan Williams calls that the prove it again bias, that women are constantly having to prove themselves over and over again. And the question is, when is it enough? And as guys, again, like Brad said, we get pushed forward on potential, but you can see how that would drive, if you were a woman, that would drive your behavior in a particular direction. If you even, and we see this, a lot from a mentoring perspective in particular, but perfectionism, right? How perfectionism, you can see how this would drive somebody, even if they had a little bit of an inkling toward that to begin with, and many of us do, right? But now you've got these forces working on you and these messaging that you need to be perfect. Also, from a tokenism perspective, there's a challenge here, because again, if women are a minority in a workplace, again, there's a sense that, and we see this in the military all the time because of the very small numbers of women we have, that they feel like, I represent all women in the military. And so therefore, if I fail or I make a mistake, right, it shines a bad light on all women. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to, have that happen to all women. And so there's that part, that very token, behavior that we find happens all the time out there. And the last part is, and this is true for men and women, but again, we see it more often with women and talk about it. We need to be aware of the imposter syndrome, that sense that, gosh, how did I get here? I'm not good enough, or they made this terrible mistake when they hired me into this job. And again, we have to acknowledge and understand that women are seeing these standards put upon them that are very different, and they're embracing them in a way that we as men, we don't ever do that.
That is so good. There's so much in the book we could talk about, but Brad, when I'm thinking in this section about the everyday interactions with women, you recommend a term called decenter. Okay. Yeah. So in my appreciation for the vocabulary that I learned from this book, it's easier to see that once I hear the term. So what does it mean to decenter, and what are some practical actions we can take, Brad?
Yeah, such a good question. So decentering is, it's really like an art form, but I got to be aware of the problem first. And so the problem is this: we as men, privileged men, who have all the opportunities in the workplace, we tend to get the opportunity to speak first. We expect to be heard. We expect to be the center of the meeting, right? We expect to get most of the airtime. When we all sit down for this meeting, all eyes tend to fall on the most senior guy in the room. And this is just part of the way we're socialized. So men have more privilege and opportunity to be heard. We're not going to equally or equalize the playing field for our female colleagues if we're always taking advantage of that privilege and continuing to center the spotlight on ourselves. So I have an opportunity to hand the mic off, metaphorically, to my female colleagues, and to say, who's not in this meeting? Natasha's not here. And it occurs to me, Natasha is the subject matter expert. I really think we shouldn't continue this conversation until she's here. I can call out her expertise in the meeting. If I get the mic first, which often happens, I can say, well, that's my 2 cents, but I would love to hear what Natasha has to say about this, because I know she's got a lot of great experience in this area. It immediately directs attention to her. I can also use a personal testimonial, right? Hey, let me just share with you one thing I learned from Natasha on this. And it was really helpful for me in solving this problem. So if you've got issues in this area, you should talk to Natasha. There are all kinds of ways I can, to use a sports metaphor, I can lateral the mic, or the attention to my female colleagues. And it's not a heavy lift for guys to do that. It takes my awareness. Look around the room and look at the talented women there and ask yourself, are they contributing? Can I pull their voices into the room and do that very deliberately?
Yeah. I think the idea of, if you think about, there's been a lot more conversation over the last couple of years about, trying to get away from manels, right? So all male panels or all white male panels, and so there's been a lot more focus on that today, which is good. But if that invitation comes to me, I look at it and I know what the makeup of the panel is, or I ask about what it is, and I find out that it is all men or all white men. One of the things, instead of just turning it down, so that would be one way to go after it, right? But to decenter would also, and think about this from a more of an allyship perspective, and we had a couple stories in the book about this, is I could think about who are the other qualified people that would bring a better voice, maybe even a better perspective, and add more to the conversation. So I can think about, well, who are the talented women? Who are the talented women of color that I should be recommending? And again, as allies, we have to have those names at our, right there, ready to go, and think about who those are. So we have to think about having a diverse network of colleagues and friends and people that we can nominate to put into those positions when we get that chance.
I'm so glad you said this and the way you said it, because I was talking to a senior leader in academia, African-American woman, who said, I feel like I have the double whammy of having to prove that I can be there for all kinds of reasons, and that I'm not there just for token reasons. And to fix the mantle, so to speak, which once again, I'd never heard that term until I read your book, but sometimes we go, well, wait, we need a black woman. It shouldn't be one of those things that we just have to throw somebody at, that our network should be so broad in our advocacy that we have women from all kinds of different backgrounds, right? And so it's not succumbing to tokenism. It's like, hey, listen, let's advocate and let's build up, right? I mean, does that point make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, rather than, hey, I've got a black woman I'm going to recommend to you, I've got a person with deep expertise that I'd like to recommend. And she's the one that you need to hear from. And the other corollary to that, you mentioned academe. Very often, black women, for example, get tasked with every diversity committee, in the university. And of course, when that happens to her, she doesn't have time to do her research. research and scholarship, she's not going to get promoted. And it's sort of a form of office housework, right? We're saddling her with this non-promotable stuff. An ally's got to look at that and say, no, 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 I got to protect her from all of that. You know, if she'd like to serve on some of these committees, great, but I'm not going to implicitly assume that she's the one that has to take this committee.
I like that. You know, we've touched on this a little bit, but I've heard different numbers, David, on how often women are interrupted more than men. So I'd be interested in, like, what do we know about that? And then could you tell us about this notion of generous listening that you talk about in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So the research, and again, there's lots of research and lots of studies that look at this in the interruptions, and it's you know, I think the kind of the middle of the road is about 3 times as much as what women are interrupted compared to men. And it's interesting to think about that. You know, does that happen in certain contexts, certain levels, certain types of leadership? And the reality is it happens all across the board because it's socialized behavior. Right? We as men learn this very young, right? And that's okay to do. And you can speak over women, and you should. And if she starts to talk, you should just keep talking louder. And I've even had that happen to me once, where I tried to interrupt a manterruption, and the guy just got louder, and he tried to talk over me at that point. It was really interesting to see how we've been socialized to do that. But it happens all the way up to the highest levels of leadership. The Supreme Court, great research out there that shows, again, that Supreme Court justices, women, are more likely to be interrupted than their male colleagues, and they get a lot less time to make their arguments, and statements that they're making as part of that. So it's interruptions, and it's also the airtime, which all feeds into back to the last point is about generous listening. And again, you know, one of the key elements, and we have this in both books, Athena Rising and Good Guys, is that as guys, one of the things that we have to do, and it's really basic, but it can be one of the hardest things to do, is we have to just show up and listen not with an intent to fix, not with an intent to find the problem, not with an intent to think about what is it I'm going to say next as soon as she stops talking. Because guess what? When you're doing all of those things, you're not really hearing what the person is saying to you, and you're not getting that depth of understanding. And really, this is where, again, if you think about empathy, this is where empathy comes from too, that ability to connect and to listen, to read people, to hear their voice, and to really understand what it is they're telling you. And again, that as men, we've got to become better at that. And generous listening is just that. It's listening with, I have no intent to fix anything here, to find the problem, to talk about whatever it is that I have on my mind that's coming up next, but to really focus in on what she is telling me right now.
Yeah, right. And I suppose that's just good advice regardless of gender, but I think the temptation might be like, I just don't know what to do here. And like you said, our mind might be racing. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Just listen. And I especially like the just the way to describe it as generous listening. Right? I mean, it's to me, it's more descriptive than active listening. Right? It's that generous listening.
Yeah, we've heard it referred to as spacious listening, you know, and it's another sort of idea there. And, you know, if I'm not sure, if I'm a guy who's not sure, when a woman comes to me, maybe a colleague, and she's got something to talk about or wants to bounce something off me, and I'm not sure if I should try and offer anything or just listen, it's okay just to ask her that, you know. So I might just say, hey, what would be most useful for you, you know, in this conversation? Would it be helpful just to kind of be a sounding board for you and do the generous listening? You know, that might be how I would understand it. Or would you like me to kind of hear what's going on and then offer some thoughts about how I might approach it? But give me a sense of what would be useful for you.
I like it.
Don't assume she wants unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I thought that was a good message. I feel like the unsolicited advice and the don't be a white knight, park the steed. There were a number of lines like that. I felt like they were memorable, and hopefully I'll remember it. Just a point of production here. My friend Trevor in the chat box for the live stream has a good question. Trevor, I invite you to call that number and we'll get you live to ask that question. So I'd love to hear your voice, Trevor. So I want to invite you to do that. While we wait, Brad, I feel like we've made progress on many fronts. I feel like the Metoo movement in some ways was helpful in some of this, but let me pass this scenario by because we have so many areas to grow in. Let's say one of our guy listeners is in a meeting or discussion, and a colleague says something that is, or at least could be taken as offensive. So, Brad, tell us what the bystander paralysis is and
Yes.
how we can overcome that in this scenario with the 2-second rule.
Yes, happy to talk about that. So, bystander paralysis, if you look at all the research in psychology on bystander effect, you see that, when something untoward or inappropriate or sexist or harassing happens in the workplace, very often people, if nothing gets said in the first 2 or 3 seconds, essentially everyone's going to just be frozen. No one's going to say anything. We call this bystander paralysis. So, this could happen in a meeting, and it's mostly men, right? But maybe there's a woman or two in the meeting, and some dude says something really sexist. You see the guys looking out of the corner of their eyes, and what they're looking at is, are any of the women offended? And maybe if they look really offended, maybe I'll say something. Otherwise, I'm just going to be paralyzed. We find that if one guy will disrupt that, and it can be a woman too, but if somebody will disrupt it, then others come, they get unfrozen, and they sort of join in the pushback. So Dave and I have a 2-second rule. We encourage men, hey, the minute you hear that harassing joke or whatever it is, I got to say something. And if I'm not sure exactly how to articulate it, I can simply say, ouch. Right. And the beauty of the ouch technique is it buys me an extra 2 seconds or so while every set of eyes in the room comes to me. And now I can articulate what didn't land the right way. So I can say, hey, I don't appreciate that, or that's not what we do here, or that's a stereotype, or I don't like the way you just framed women that we work with. Now I can frame that. And it's really important when I do that, Andy, that I not attribute my disruption to women. And we see this too often. When men do disrupt, they'll say, hey, dude, Mary's in the room. Come on. No, that's not real allyship. I have to say that didn't land okay with me. We don't do that here. Please don't do that again.
Yeah. Oh man, that's good. I think I've heard it said, don't be a bystander, be an upstander. I mean, there's different ways to say it, but I think there's in that moment, sometimes you just don't know what to say. And so you must have at least 5 or 6 items in the book, some as simple as ouch and others that are more direct, but we make it clear. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Trevor, is that you that joined?
Yeah. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, great to hear from you, Trevor. Hey, why don't you ask your question? You've got an interesting scenario that you put there in the chat box.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been recently hired to be the executive director for a nonprofit. Now we're super small. Everybody else is part-time. And we've got 5 guys and 2 ladies. And so knowing those circumstances, what can I do as the executive to create a culture of allyship for those 5 guys? And then what can I do to encourage and uplift and spur on those 2 ladies?
Yeah. We got a bunch, right, Dave? We got a whole book's worth here.
That's true. Yeah. What are a couple places to start, maybe?
Yeah. So I'll just start in, Dave, and jump in. So Trevor, really good question. I would start by making sure that the 2 women on your team feel fully included. Make it clear that they are part of the team. And what I mean by this is, make sure that they're at meetings, make sure they're invited. If you're doing something social, make sure they're on the invite list. Make it clear to the men that these female colleagues are full members of the team. When you're having meetings and conversations, make sure you pull for their input. Make sure that you listen, make sure that it's heard. And I think you can role model that. So many of the women in our interviews for Good Guys said it meant so much that he conveyed to the other men that I was a full member of the team. And there was never any doubt about that. He treated me like the guys, and that really made all the difference in how the men on the team accepted me or not.
Yeah, I think, in this world, especially right now, Trevor, but I'm assuming you're probably not doing a whole lot in person, doing a lot of work from home
No,
still.
yeah, I work from home, and most of the team does too.
Yeah, so think about it, in this, the Zoom virtual world that we live in and we work in right now, and how you're having, when you're interacting as a group, do you have ground rules? Do you have ground rules on the conversation and how things are going to go? So we know that, again, from a gender dynamics in these kind of team meetings, that all sorts of things can crop up, right? Everything from the interruptions and the airtime, and we can think about office housework and all sorts of things. So what are the ground rules that you could put into effect, right, from the very beginning, regardless of of who's in the meeting? That these are the standing rules. So, for example, if we're going to have things like, if you want to have somebody who's taking notes for the meeting, if it's somebody, you got to have somebody who makes sure that we get all the do outs, or just keeping us on track on, here's somebody who writes or creates the agenda and kind of runs through the agenda as you're going through it. Somebody who's kind of keeping track of the time. Well, that's all office housework. Somebody's doing something there and they're not focusing in on something else, and it's administrative. And probably most of us would like to go, I really don't want to do that. Can I come up with a rotating basis to do that, right? So that it's just normal. That's the way we do business. And again, I think if you can start setting some of these ground rules from the very beginning, even in the virtual world, it levels the playing field right off the bat, because it means that we're thinking about how do we keep all the access, the same out there. The same thing goes for opportunities. So there's the negative side, kind of as I look at it from a admin perspective and it kills me when I'm in a meeting and I see it's like, hey, we need somebody to go do this work or do this committee, be a member of this committee, and it's like everybody's like, oh God, I don't want to do that. I know they're all thinking it. I'm thinking it too, and I know if we wait 2 more seconds that there'll be a woman who's going to raise her hand and take it. And it's like, so I got to think about, how can we put something in place to make sure that we're not, that's just not always going to women. So how do we fairly redistribute or distribute that kind of housework? But the same thing goes for opportunities. When opportunities come up, how do I make sure that everybody is aware of them? How can we be very transparent in access to benefits or programs or good deals, right, that come up all the time, that as guys we tend to kind of share in our informal networks? And even in the COVID, right, we're still sharing these things via email, via chat, via Slack. I'm not sure what communication channels you're using there, but how can you be more transparent about the opportunities that are out there as well?
And I'll just add one more thing, Trevor. I think you gotta, as the leader of this organization, you have to be willing to hold the other men accountable. I think that's part of your job. And so, Dave and I have a couple of hashtags. So if a guy who's working for you, is saying stuff that's inappropriate or is doing something sexist, either in public or privately, you got to go to him and use the hashtag bro no. That's just not what we do here. You can't do that, brother. And I can share that with him behind the scenes, but I gotta express that to him. And by the same token, when a guy is really leaning in as a terrific ally for women, we got the go bro go, or go bro go hashtag. And so got to reinforce men who are doing the work and getting this right.
Good, man.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Trevor, thanks for calling in, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor. Somebody in the chat box said, love the discussion. Let me ask you in a more general context. Y'all talk about listening, how we need to listen, but what if the other side has nothing to say? So it reminds me of our kind of the section in the book where you talk about there's these questions to ask, but you can't go like, dude, I just read a book. I need I need you to answer these questions. So there is something about knowing when and how to do this. Any thoughts about when you want to do listening, but it feels like there's just not much feedback being given?
Yeah. So do you think the question referred to, I'm asking a woman and she doesn't have much to say right now? Is that's kind of
how I took it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so boy, I think I got to be really respectful about that and have some decent boundaries and not be
Yeah.
intrusive. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I really want to be respectful. And so when Dave was talking about asking to ask, that might really fit here. I'm curious about your experiences. I'm curious about, maybe you're the only Latina woman in this whole office. How has that been for you? And are we doing enough to make this a
Mhm.
good place for you to work? I'm really curious, but boy, if that's not something she wants to share, I'm not going to become intrusive,
Yeah.
even though that might help my gender intelligence in some way. And I'll
Mhm.
just add, we often get men who are also kind of weirded out about, how would I even start a mentoring conversation with a woman? And I'm not even sure she wants me to mentor her.
Mm.
So, don't go to her and say, I'd like to mentor you. I just use my creepy voice, and that could be creepy, but better to say, hey, the hiring committee sure got it right when they brought you on board. I saw you present last week and
Mm.
you did a terrific job, and I'd like to make sure we keep you here. So if you'd
Mm.
ever like to talk about your next steps, feel free to drop by. It's an invite, but there's no
That's great.
expectation that she has to follow through with that.
Yeah, I like that. I wonder, and it all depends, because it could be personality, it could be a number of things. But if somebody doesn't want to talk about some of this, that might be a sign to me that I haven't fostered enough psychological safety either. I mean, there it could
Yeah.
be something that, not look at as they're the problem, they're not speaking up. Maybe there's something about the culture that I've created that makes them suspect
Yeah.
about it as well. So, any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, certainly. I think there's lots of leadership lessons in there, right? That, it's like, how come people don't bring me these issues or problems? Why do they wait until they've become turned into something that it's like, it's
Mhm.
really hard to solve now, or it's really
Yeah.
bad, it's really become challenging? It's like, well, probably because, have you thought about how you react when people bring you bad news or bring you problems like this?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing when you get feedback. How are you responding to it?
Yeah.
And much in the same way that we talk about in the book, that you need to think about, when to receive feedback, to receive bad news, or receive, again, more of the kind of direct information that you need as a leader. You need to think about, how do you respond to it in a way that shows that you value it. It's a gift, and I want
Yeah.
more of it out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not just checking boxes and signaling and things like that.
Exactly.
This isn't exactly along those lines, but it's just maybe one last scenario here, because you don't avoid in the book that there's times you have to give very honest feedback. Right? I mean, that is part of our role as leaders, to be able to do this. So, I'll even get a little bit more sensitive here, because this comes from a guy. Let's say a guy listening to us has a woman on their team that, in his estimation, is dressing inappropriately. Okay. So let's just go with that. Right. So this is multiple layered, because that might be his problem. But let's just say that that's his perspective as someone who genuinely cares about her effectiveness. Let's go with that. So in a Me Too world, there could be a lot of concerns added up that lead people to staying quiet instead of giving feedback that might be helpful. So let's start with David here, okay? And then Brad, you're welcome to add your thoughts as well. What advice do you have about giving feedback to direct reports in a Me Too world? You can go specific in that situation, or you can go more generically as well. But I'm talking about not the little stuff, like the stuff that feels like there's all kinds of reasons why I maybe don't feel safe speaking up.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and a concern we've heard. I think several times from men in particular. And I think one of the things you can do, we like to talk about flipping the script. It's like, so what would that conversation sound like, or would you even have that conversation with another man?
I thought of that. Yeah.
And or what would that sound like if a woman was going to come have that conversation with you, right? And again, I think that, again, you can go, well, that's not the same. Well, okay, maybe it isn't quite the same, but it gets you to begin thinking about appropriateness, and how would I say that, and how would I like to be somebody to say that to me, and in a way that makes sense. The other thing is, I think you have to think about, in particular, what are the guidelines? What are the expectations when it comes to, because a lot of companies have, you just have to dress professionally. Okay, well, what does professionally mean to you, to me, to her, to different generations of people? I mean, there is all sorts of things out there, and so how explicit is it, or are there a lot of implicit understandings about, professional means that jeans aren't okay, or whatever the case might be out there. But I think you have to think about that. But then the other part of it is that, again, I do think there's a valid point here. And again, there's a point where I would say something to a guy about his attire. If I thought it wasn't, either one, it wasn't appropriate for him because it wasn't, maybe if you have professional standards within your organization about what that was, or it didn't look good for the overall organization, and why. And I have to think about why didn't it represent well for the organization? Mm-hmm. And then why wasn't it, maybe personally for him or professionally for him, why wasn't that appropriate? And then translate that into, okay, now how would I say that to her? You know, why isn't it appropriate? Is this a gender difference? Is it something I don't understand? Is it something that maybe you want to go ask another woman at this point and go, hey, I'm just trying to sort this out. What do you think about this? Am I off base? Am I way out in left field on this one? Or, you know, is it even appropriate for me to say something at this point to her? If you have that question, because I want to say something because I care, because she's a valuable member of the team. She's talented. She has a place and a future here. And I want to make sure she continues to succeed, but I don't want something like this to hold her back in some way, because people just don't see her in the light that I see her.
Yeah. And just one more thing. I think a lot of this also comes down to trust. And have I gone out of my way to establish trust with her already? You know, and if there's that kind of connection in the relationship, and I've demonstrated that I'm a trustworthy man and that I have her best interests at heart, that may not be as awkward a conversation as I might imagine. The other thing I might do is look for real data, right? So I might share with her, hey, a couple of different guys have mentioned your appearance, and it's not in a flattering way. And that could be their problem, but just want you to be aware that's the narrative. And I'm concerned about how that narrative may affect you, you know, in the company or in the workplace.
Yeah, I can give you a real world example. This is not around dress, but this is also something. So, you know, again, especially around particular regions of the United States and in certain younger generations, we find that women tend to be socialized more into having into uptalk, right? So kind of ending their statements in sentences in kind of a question. And again, this is kind of, there is a little bit of a gender stereotype to it, but it does tend to be more prevalent with women. The question is, you know, is that damaging to her, or is that just something it's like, you know, it's not even worth talking about? And do you say something? Because if you recognize it and you see that she's not being seen and heard in the way and taken seriously in a way because of that, or if it's impeding her progress in some way, well, is there something we need to change within the organization, the culture? Or is this something that I need to address with her? And I think that's a great question about all of these kinds of things. Is it something that's about the organization that we need to change in the culture, or is this more about her? Because often we default to, oh, well, she just needs to go back and pretzel herself back into our organization.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think there's just something about, and I love how you both address this. If it's clear that our intentions, we have their best intentions in mind. It's not about me. It is about how can we lift them up. That can go a long way when it comes to the feedback. And once again, that's across genders, right? That's just good leadership. But we just have to make sure that we think that one through. And I love that advice. Let me end with this. We have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast. Even in the very beginning of the book, you mentioned your sons. What are some practical things you each are doing to raise good guys? So Brad, let's start with you.
Well, my good guys are all adults now. And so, you know, I hope actually, Andy, that I have been able, over the course of their whole development, been able to model a few things that I think really matter. And, you know, a couple of that come to mind are leaning in, and Dave and I are really big on this, leaning in fully as a partner for their mother at home. So, you know, if you happen to be a guy who's partnered with a woman, and you're not sharing in the domestic work and the childcare and the homeschooling, whatever the obligations are, you're really not an ally in the way that you could be, because not only are we not going to get to real gender equity in the workplace until men are sharing equally at home. That's just not going to happen. But I have an opportunity to role model. In this case, you mentioned sons. I have an opportunity to role model what really egalitarian relationship looks like. And if I do that well, my sons go off to the workplace expecting that their workplace relationships with women will also be respectful and dignified and equal. And so, boy, if you're a man listening to this and you want to change the workplace long term, do the work at home so that your sons can see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think even today, because again, like Brad, all my children and my son, they're all grown adults and they're off doing this right now themselves. But I think we can still be there, I think, as parents and as mentors for them as they're moving forward in their lives with their partners, to talk about, what does that look like when you fully support your partner's career, and how do you, what does the balance of that look like, and what's an egalitarian or an equitable way to approach again, dual career families, which is what the vast majority of us are today. I would just like to real quick give my accomplice and co-conspirator here a quick shout out, because he's not going to talk about it, he's too humble. But so he's a new grandfather too, by the way, over the last year, and I'm very excited and happy for him that he's getting to experience that. But I think he's role modeling that too, because I guarantee you he's doing at least 50-50 of supporting his children and his daughter-in-law in this case, with the new baby, in terms of being there to help provide childcare and provide some caregiving there whenever the flexibility allows to do that.
That's cool.
So good on you, Brad.
Yeah,
Thanks, brother.
Way to go, Grandpa.
Yeah. See, I just want to point out that I thought y'all were so young that you still had young kids at home. I just put that out.
Well, thank you, Andy.
Well, thank you.
Hey, for those listening, if you'd like more about what you've heard here, get a copy of David and Brad's book, Good Guys. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So David and Brad, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thanks for including us, Andy.
That's a wrap. Okay. So, oh man, thank you guys for your generous responses. I really appreciate it. It's a topic that that needs to be covered. And when I posted that LinkedIn post, I didn't know if I'd get 5 responses or if we.
Man, that thing took off.
The nerve.
That was crazy. I was amazed. You could almost do a research project just going through all those responses. Yeah.
It's a very generous group on LinkedIn. I'll have to tell you, people who are they're not just posting, hey, I did this today. I mean, they're really using it as a learning platform. And so I have great appreciation for that. And it's a thread I expect to go for a while, but thank you for joining in the conversation actually there. That was great. So
yeah, it was a blast to read that. So
any feedback for me on the interview? Anything that
a lot of fun, Andy.
Yeah.
You make that so engaging, and it was so clear, by the way, that you had already really read our work carefully, and we really appreciate that, because it really makes it an informed conversation. Very often that's not the case. Someone's just seen the book cover, and so often the conversation could be a little more discordant because they're not informed. But man, you were really informed, and it really made it, and also your personality is just fun, so you make it easy.
Well,
I think we are able to go a little deeper too when you because you're posing questions in a particular context based off what you read, and so I think we get to go a little deeper with the responses, which is really nice. And I really love the fact that you're bringing in a couple, some live callers and live chat going on. Because again, we find in a lot of the different venues that there are some great questions out there. And they're just juicy questions that you would love to get into. And again, that's engaging your audience.
Yeah, we don't normally live stream, but I just thought the interest there was such that we'll at least open it up. And when the episode goes live, I don't have a target date for it yet, but when it does, I'll definitely let you guys know. And Congratulations. I know just like people often miss how much preparation goes into a meeting or whatever by other people, I think people have no clue how much goes into writing a book like this that is so effective. So congratulations to both of you.
Thank you,
Thank
Andy.
you very much.
Really
All right.
appreciate it. Thanks for including
My
us.
pleasure. Yep. Thank you for joining.
Yep.
All right. Have a great day.
Take care.
You. See ya.
See ya.
Well, for those of you that joined via the live stream, thank you for your comments there. I appreciate the interaction. Maybe we'll do more of these live streams, but in the meantime, I would love your feedback. So join our conversation that's going on LinkedIn about this book, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Take care.